Hello and welcome to Healthy Seminars. I'm your moderator, Lauren Brown, and today is Conscious Tuesday, Finding Calmness in the Presence of Uncertainty. And our speaker is Jessie Shaw. I'm so glad to have Jessie back in the Zoom room with us today. And before we hand it over for both a lecture and practical experience, I want to just do our usual housekeeping for everybody. So I'm just going to share my screen here and just remind everybody that if you go to Healthy Seminars resources, you can see what we have by categories, and then you can go to the calendar, and by looking at the calendar, you can see what's happening next. So here we are today. This is also where you'll find the replay links. We usually keep the replays up for about 48 hours. And so if you've missed something, you can go back to a previous month. You can see if any of these previews are available or contact us when they may become available again. And just to see what's happening. So today we got the talk is Conscious Tuesday, Ling Shu Chapter 8, Practical Guidance in the Time of COVID-19. And I just want to show you what's happening for May. And please come back to the resource page daily because we're constantly adding content here. And as I mentioned, this is where you'll find your replays. Tomorrow, Sharon Weisenbaum is going to do an herbal talk, classical Chinese herbal principles in response to COVID-19. This Friday, May 8th, an important talk for many of us. It's COVID-19 practice guidelines for acupuncturists going back to work. So just to help you, the safety protocols, what you need to have in your office, etc. Valerie Hobbs, Steve Shulman is going to do that. And then in theme with Conscious Tuesday, I did a Conscious Tuesday a while back, and out of that, I'm going to do a 8-hour workshop divided over 4 days, so 2 hours a day. And that starts on Monday, this Monday, May 11th. And it's live and interactive, although those that register will have access to the recording for a month. However, registration will close on the end of day, Sunday, May 10th. And then the group that I have will spend 4 days together doing lecture and practical experience on mastery manifestation. And if you missed the introduction, you can go to this link to watch that introduction talk that I did. And then on the 13th, we were supposed to have this lecture. It was proposed for the Integrated Fertility Symposium that was canceled, and we now have it scheduled. And it is by Dr. Carrie Jones, a naturopathic physician, talking about sex drive and hormones. How do you make a baby when you're not in the mood? And then you can see we have other talks that are happening throughout the month. We got a safety course for those that need their safety hours in acupuncture, etc. And so you can just keep looking at the calendar to find out what's happening. Now, I wanted to share with you also, I'll stop sharing this part right here, 1 sec. And I kind of want to get ready to introduce our speaker today, which is Jessie. Now, Jessie also was supposed to be at the Integrative Fertility Symposium. We were supposed to have her present in the self-care track, and unfortunately, the conference got canceled. However, I'm fortunate that we can still use Zoom and have her offer some of her content and stuff here today. And because we've been doing Conscious Tuesday, what better fit than to have Jessie Shaw. And I want to put out a big gratitude thank you to Lori Deschard, because it was Lori who introduced me to Jessie, and Lori did a Conscious Tuesday talk for us, and Lori's in the room today too, so hopefully we'll hear from Lori as well during this lecture. Jessie does have a course on Healthy Seminars for 3 continuing education credits called The Exploration of Ancient Consciousness and Ritualism to help deepen your practice. And a little bit about Jessie. So Jessie, she's a licensed acupuncturist. She's a Master of Science in Oriental Medicine. She's an herbalist as well in New York City. She was raised in Colorado, and she studied music performance in college and graduate school before moving to New York. She ultimately became an advertising executive and obtained an MBA from NYU. She began practicing acupuncture in 2002 after receiving her Master of Science in Oriental Medicine. And she released a documentary-style film called The I Ching, Ancient Consciousness and the Creation of Chinese Medicine, that examines the role of magical and mythical consciousness in the formation of this ancient medicine. And that's what attracted me to have Jessie put together that course that I mentioned that's online at Healthy, because I'm really into consciousness. And I'm studying under people like Joe Dispenza and my teacher, all these new science of consciousness people. And then Jessie shows me these ancient texts that talk about this stuff from way, way back that's written down that she shares in her movie and in her course. So really glad to be able to have Jessie here with us today to talk on this. Now, I want to do a reminder, a disclaimer, just to let you know that today and what you're learning here is for educational and entertainment purposes only. This is not medical advice. This should not be interpreted as medical advice because it's for educational purposes only. If you have a health condition, please do seek out a healthcare provider. All right, let's bring up Jessie's PowerPoint, her presentation. And I just want to remind everybody, back on March 20th, I had a talk with my colleague, Randine Lewis, and we decided that let's do stuff to lift our spirit. There was a lot of stress going on, and we came up with Conscious Tuesdays. And since then, as you know, we've been having talks sometimes daily or twice a day, and we changed our logo on Healthy Seminars for the short term, and the logo says Community, Unity, Immunity. And this is why we want to bring people together. We have our cameras on. And as you know, at the end of the lecture, we open up our microphones and we send gratitude and appreciation to the person who's presented and also a chance to connect with each other. I encourage you to look through the pictures here to see your peers, your tribe. It's healthy for you to connect with each other. And if you have a question, feel free to use the raise your hand option that's under participants. You'll either see raise your hand option or under participants an option to raise your hand. And so we want to keep our community together, and we want to, rather than sharing you with bad news and stressful news, watching CNN at Healthy Seminars, we wanted to create community and create information. So when you're on Zoom with us, it's filling you up. It's building you up, not building you down. And so I hope this is continuing to work for you, and I'm very happy to hear and see so many people back in the room. All right, Jessie, I'm all ready to listen and to participate in your lecture today.
Okay, thank you so much, Lauren. And thank you, everyone, for coming and to hear about these ideas about Lingshu Chapter 8 and in this time of the coronavirus. And as Lauren said, I live here in New York City. I've been sheltering in place in New York City. And it really came to me that this particular chapter from the Ling Shu, which is one of my all-time favorites, I thought, well, maybe there's something here that can serve us both to maybe provide some insight and also maybe to kind of provide a little bit of, empowerment to us as we move through this time, which has been so crazy, I think, for everyone on so many different levels. So the intention here is to help us with this time of COVID, but hopefully will take us out into the future as we continue moving forward. And my intention is that it's a way for you to help connect more completely with yourself, which in turn will help you to have a deeper experience with your patients, whether or not you're, Zooming with them, or if, at that point in time when we actually get to sit in person with them. So this image on the front of my cover of my presentation, I selected it purposefully, and it is from the Shanhai Jing, which is the Classics of Oceans and Seas, and it's a very old book. This particular image is a 16th century woodcut from an edition of that year, but the actual text goes back to being pulled together between like 600 and 200 BC. And it's a book of, it talks about myths, it talks about geography, and in a way, it's also one of our earliest Chinese medicine texts because it includes some magical herbal formulas. And so what we see here is, this is the god Zhurong riding on the back of these two dragons, and he's the god of fire. And in Chinese cosmology, he was one of the people who helped, one of the gods that helped to separate heaven from earth and also to set up universal order. And we see he's looking over at his acolyte and who is bringing fire. And so it's sort of like in our quest for resuming some kind of order, we need illumination and light. And so he seemed like a good symbol of what we're hopefully up to over the next, months, however long it takes us to establish whatever's going to happen next year. So, all right, there we go. So in my time here in New York City, and I've lived in New York City a long time. I've been here in 9/11. I was here in Hurricane Sandy. And I'm here for this now. And what I notice is that there are these different kind of feeling tones that go on in the city. And I sort of realized that for me, they kind of seem like episodic movements of qi. And this is going to be a big theme of what we're going to talk about today, are these movements of qi. And for the Chinese, qi has been part of their reality for centuries and centuries. And so what I'm showing here is the etymology of the qi character, that we're starting as early as 1250 BC, how it was depicted on the oracle bones, which were, there were divination practices and rituals that were conducted each day by the head of the tribe or the king. And so, and then they would, scribe these on the outside of the tortoiseshell or the oxen scapula. And it takes us all the way through to our modern character, which also has the inclusion of the rice grain in it. But you can see, as it progressed, qi for them is a very universal concept. So it meant that which fills the body and that which activates life, as well as being vapors and wind and breath. And they knew very early on, the first Chinese meditation text was written in 300 BC, and that's when Qi, Jing, and Shen were first interconnected with each other. And they already at that time had this idea that you could work with the breath in order to cultivate and build the Jing and to have greater longevity in life. And, qi was long celebrated. And so I just love some of these ancient artifacts. And so I wanted to pull a few of them into the lecture. So these are some items that were pulled out of a tomb that was sealed in 160 BC. And these are depictions of qi. So we see the lacquer bowl on the upper left, the orange bowl, those little twirls. Those are their drawings of qi. And then below, this is a funerary object. And again, you see these swirls and these clouds. And again, those are the articulation of that kind of misty, vapory qi. And then you can also see, if you kind of look in closely, there are these little characters, which are both there for protective purposes, as well as to bring good luck to the person that's passing, into the next world. And then I had to show you this image too, because when I saw this and really took it in, I got very excited by it. So this is from a sculpture or a statue that is from the Warring States period, which ran from 480 to 221 BC. So we're talking about something that is incredibly old. And, with the artisan who created this winged creature, which is part feline and part dragon. And you can see it's got talons, it's got wings, it's got, the mane going on it. But the thing that's magnificent about it is the fact that the artisan was able to capture momentum and the movement of qi in this object, in this creature. And so we see that it's just getting ready to spring off into the air, and it's filled with life and motion. So, it's just to say that, so this idea of the movement of qi is long lived in China, and they had a very, very deep understanding of it. Now, coming back to New York City and the coronavirus, I started thinking about this, and, New York City, the epitome of movement of traffic and lots of people. I mean, talk about a movement of qi, a big wave, and then it comes up against the coronavirus, and then abruptly and overnight, New York City turns into a ghost town, as shown by these pictures here. And, and so I was thinking about this, and it's like, wow, it's sort of like, if we are looking at a wave of water, when it comes up and it strikes like stone walls, and you can see what happens to this wave. It like comes up and it starts circling back on itself. And it also becomes very pixelated and very fragmented. And there's all this mist that's going on there in the configuration. And so this is, I believe, sort of a depiction of what this shock of the coronavirus is like on both a personal, a social, and a global level. We're in the midst of this dispersion and this like atomization, fractionalization. The other thing, though, that I also wanted to add is, as we know as acupuncturists, that the change in the movement of qi, when that happens in the human body, that's at the Jing well points, when it goes from a yin meridian to a yang meridian and vice versa. And so we also know what powerful points Jing well points are. So you can bleed them and stop a sore throat or disperse swelling in an ankle that's been sprained. I mean, you can also resuscitate people with Jing well points. So it's just to kind of underscore that we're in this very powerful moment right now, and that the qi is turned and we're sort of waiting for it to rebuild itself and to restructure. And that's where we're going to turn to the Ling Shu. So as you probably all know, the Ling Shu and Ling Shu Chapter 8 specifically, it's a dialogue between the Yellow Emperor and his illustrious physician, Jibo. And so, and as these classical texts go, the question and the answer are both highly important. Like every character that's used in these classical texts is very, very important. And so here we have, in the words of the Yellow Emperor, and it's his part, he starts with a question, but this isn't really a question. Many things he just asserts. And I just had to show this because, here he says, if a situation arises where following overflowing and complete invasion, and then he describes this very scene that I've just depicted with that ocean wave. So the essences are lost, the Hun and Po are agitated and uncontrollable, the Zhi and the Yi become confused and disordered, and know how in reflection abandon us. So it's kind of like an apt description, even though this was written in the 1st century BC, of exactly where we are now on many levels. And then I thought it was just considerably ironic that he, at the very end, he says, should one accuse heaven or is it the fault of man? And it kind of seems like, like if you read the news, it's like, well, who's to blame for this? Someone must be to blame. Is it this country? Is it this country? Is it the government? Like whose fault is this? And so just a reminder about the Ling Shu, which I'm sure you all know, but first off, I'm using the translation of Father Lar and Elizabeth Rochat de la Vallée. And Father Lar was a Jesuit priest who's no longer, he's deceased, but he lived for a good part of his life in China, and probably as a Western person was one of the closest to understanding the Chinese psyche. And of course, Elizabeth Rochat de la Vallée is still alive, and I strongly recommend, if you ever get a chance to hear her lecture, that you do that. She's quite magnificent. So we've got 2 books that make up the Huangdi Neijing. There's the Suwen, the basic questions, and then there's the Ling Shu, which is translated as spiritual or numinous pivot. And so, so that idea, the Ling Shu is also, it's an acupuncture book. So when it's saying numinous pivot, or this idea that a needle combined with the person who is administering the needle, that they can shift everything in the healing by doing that. And so we're focused in on Chapter 8, which is called Rooted in Spirit, or Benshen. And it's called that because of this next line of the text, which again, it's part of the Yellow Emperor's question. It's not Shibo's response, which we're going to look at in just a moment. But it basically, the Yellow Emperor asserts, in all needling, the method is above all not to miss rooting in the spirits. So there's a couple of things to be said here. I mean, there's many things to be said, but what I'd like to bring up is, first of all, that the people who pulled the Ling Shu together, that they put these words in the mouth of the emperor and not in the mouth of Qi Bo. And that's because the Yellow Emperor would be considered the indisputable authority, so his word was not questioned. So it's as if to state, without doubt, that in order to enact a powerful and an effective treatment with people, that it's imperative that one be rooted in spirit and one not miss rooting in the spirits. And then for us as practitioners, the question arises, at least for me, what does that mean? What does that mean for me as a practitioner? How do I do that? How do I connect with my patients in that way? So, so we turn to Qi Bo's response, and Qi Bo's response really it addresses a few of these things. It covers how we call back the spirits and the essences. I think it also gives us a sense of what it means to be rooted in spirit. And although we're just going to look at the first 5 lines of his response, because it's quite an in-depth work, and trust me, 5 lines is plenty, but the whole 13 lines, in my view, in looking at this text, that it is an alchemical transformation. It's a description of how to bring about an alchemical transformation for someone, so that you take everything that is existing, all the problems, all the gifts, all the resources, and all of that gets formed into something new. So in many ways, it's very apt to what we're about in this time period. So let's just take a look at what these 5 lines are that we're going to be examining. And we're going to do exercises. We're going to do 2 exercises around them, coming back to this idea about them, about movement of qi. So these read, heaven within me is virtue, earth within me is breaths. It's a little slow here. Virtue flows down, the breaths expand, and there's life. Okay, so those are our 5 lines of text that we're going to take a look at. And one thing to keep in mind is that Chinese, as a language, that it uses symbolic language structure. It's not a linear language structure. And so what that means is the Chinese, especially in these ancient classical texts, it's less of a narrative and more of this idea of a kind of communication where a lot of information is packed into each character that's selected. So it's very, very succinct in its choice of words, but it's almost like you have to unpack each word to amplify what the meaning is of what's being spoken. So for our purposes today, what I really want to focus us in on is an interpretation of these 5 lines as being movements of qi. So we've got the vertical axis of virtue flows down, the horizontal axis of that the breaths expand, and then this field state where there is life. And so that's how we're going to take a look at it. Now, before we do that, and as I said, we're gonna play with it and experiment with it. But I think it's really important, talking about unpacking characters, that we at least take a quick look at the 3 major characters that are discussed here. We've got day, virtue is 1. We're going to look at qi, and we're going to look at sheng, or life. So virtue or day, it's a rather limited kind of word in the English translation because it's got such strong kind of moralistic overtones to it. And so if we go back and we look at the character itself and what it's depicting, the character on the left is a person who's stepping out into the world with their left foot. And then on the right side, we have 3 characters that are stacked on top of each other. At the top are the 4 directions. So we see this cross, which is indicating the 4 directions. Underneath is an eye, and underneath that is the heart. And so, what this is saying as a movement of qi, or as having a kind of meaning, is that as we step out into the world, that our job is to connect and have our hearts look out of our eyes in everything that we see. So we need to walk our heart out our eyes in all contexts of our life. And the fact that this first sentence of Chibo's response, he says, heaven within me is virtue. He uses the literal words zai wo, within me, is to say that each one of us has dropped into us this personal virtue or this personal thing that is ours alone to find and ours alone to channel out into the world. So it's like our personal Tao that's ours alone to bring into the world. And also this idea that it is a way of being in the world that is both a state of mind and body. And we're gonna get to that, the state of mind and body in just a minute. And we're gonna see exactly what that looks like and how we can do that, how we can go about doing it. Okay, and so then now let's look at qi. And of course, I've already talked about the fact of what a vast meaning qi has, or breaths in this case with this translation. We've already talked about that it can be vapor or wind and kind of an atmospheric place. It's also the animation of life. But here too, we're saying that earth within me is breath. So it's also saying, even though, heaven has dropped down virtue into me, but I'm a human being that walks on the earth. I'm a person of the earth, and I'm supposed to channel this thing down to the earth. And the fact that it's breaths with the idea of inhalation and exhalation also brings in introduces the idea of yin and yang, or this duality that goes on, which then in turn helps us see that we've gone from the one of the virtue and the Tao to the two of yin yang and the two of self and others. So kind of a relating type of being. And then the last key character in this is the word shang, or life. And so again, I'm showing the ancient characters for this Chinese word. And we've got an oracle bone script, a bronze inscription, and a small seal script from the 2nd century AD. And it's basically a plant growing up out of the earth. And you can see how its limbs are reaching up toward the sky. And so, we can sort of take in this use of the word as being this idea that life is a flourishing and that we are meant to expand and transform, but also that we can't do this alone. Just as a plant needs earth, it needs sunlight, it needs water. We too need, others to help us come into who it is that we are in this lifetime. So, all right, so now we were talking about movements of qi. So now let's kind of shift gears for a moment and take a look at this text from that vantage point. So here we are, we have heaven within me is virtue, earth within me is breaths, virtue flows down. So we're talking about the vertical axis dropping down from heaven to earth. And one of my very dear teachers, who's out in California, Steve Gilligan, who he's a meditator and also an Aikido practitioner. And he talks a lot about embodied centering and, this idea of dropping down and coming into our centers. And, so we see it there. We can also turn to ancient Chinese medicine texts, and they also help us to understand what the movement of qi for a person who is a person of virtue, what that looks like for them. And so I've pulled a quote out of one of the Ma Wangdui medical manuscripts. And so these are medical manuscripts that predate the Wangdi I Ching that were discovered in China in 1970 and have been completely translated now. And this particular model of the vessels was probably scribed around 215 BC and goes back a little bit earlier than that, of when the idea was probably talked about. And it says in the model of the vessels, which are the meridians, are also something the sage prizes. As for vapor, qi, it goes to the lower part of the body and harms the upper part. It follows warmth and departs from coolness. The sage has a cold head and warm feet. And so, to understand and to get a sense of these movements of qi, I try to include images that depict it for us. So, here we see this picture of these two people who are practicing Tai Chi, I'm assuming. And I think the woman is a little bit more dropped down to a greater extent than the man. He seems like he's caught a little bit more up in his eyes and his head, but she's doing a pretty good rendition of really dropping that qi down into her lower body. We also have this thought echoed in the Shuangzi. So Shuangzi being a Taoist philosopher who followed Lao Tzu. And in the Shuangzi, it's written, the true man, sage, perfected man. And forgive me, this is, we're like, it's not sexist. It's just how these texts were written, that it speaks to men, but it's also speaking to women. But the true man of ancient times breathes with his heels, the mass of men breathe with their throats. And I thought the Dalai Lama, this beautiful picture of the Dalai Lama, is kind of a nice articulation, mainly because his feet are shown, but also you can see how dropped down he is even when he's just smiling and playing with his prayer beads. Now, if we go and we try to grapple with this concept of warm feet versus warm head, coming back there, I wanted to show us some pictures of that. So here we've got on the left side of the screen is an image that I'm hoping represents warm feet for you. And so we see these men who they're all practicing some kind of a martial art. And for the most part, they're really pretty much down on their feet. I get the sense of warm feet from them. Some are up a little bit higher, but they're really pretty far down. And then we contrast that with this picture of Donald Trump at the top of the screen. And you can see that he clearly has a warm head. Like the man is not embodied at all. I'm sure he has no feeling. He doesn't even know where his feet are, much less where his lower dantian is. So, this is what warm head looks like. But I also wanted to include this man down beneath him because he also is, I believe, doing a version of warm head. He looks, his body is held in a position where you can see he's kind of depressed, but it's almost like you can see the circling thoughts of, what he's questioning, or maybe the self-criticism, or perhaps his worry. Like it's all up there. He's not really in his body. And then just so we don't get caught in the world of martial arts to think that that's the only place that we've got this sense of embodied centering, I thought it also shows some pictures of musicians and dancers, because often musicians and dancers, when they get in the flow of what they're doing, they're a very strong depiction of what we mean by this embodied centering. And so this image of these three men playing guitar on the side, I believe that the guy in the center is probably the most dropped down into his lower dantian. The man to his left is kind of caught up in his eyes because he's trying to figure out what chord is being played by the guy in the middle. And then the guy to the right, you can see his chi is actually held about chest level. He's not dropped down as much. He's more dropped down than the guy on the other side, but he's got a lot of energy in his chest. And then these lovely women dancers. The thing to notice here, and this is the thing with dancing, whether it's ballet or modern, is that in order to have that sense of lightness on the top, everything is pushing down into the earth quite dramatically. So I think these women are also showing us a beautiful articulation of what it is to have that kind of embodied centering and to be down in their bodies. Okay, so, with that movement of qi discussed, I thought that we might take a moment and do an exercise to model and see if we can do that moment of dropping the qi down in our bodies. And the thing is, it's going to be, I'm going to lead you in. It's a little bit like what we're doing if we were going into a meditation. However, it's different in the sense that we're not just trying to stop, the thoughts in our mind. That's really not our goal here. Our goal here really is to move our attention down into our lower dantian so that we have a bodily felt sense of that. Okay, so what I want to ask you to do is get into a comfortable position, wherever it is that you are, And you can do this, you can be sitting, you can be standing, all is good. And so as you get into a comfortable position, you can start to notice the breath. And I also ask that you drop your gaze so that you're not looking in to the computer screen. You can just listen to my voice and follow along. And you can close your eyes if you'd like. I think that's great. But at the very least, look down and soften your gaze so that you're not looking at anything directly. And then as you continue to relax and feel into your body, you can bring your awareness to your breath. And let's just take a moment, just kind of relax in and notice the inhale and the exhale of your breath. Good. And then start to feel into dropping your awareness down in your body. And you can do this by noticing your sits bones where they're connected on the chair or floor if you're sitting. And if you're standing, you can notice where your feet are connected with the earth, almost as if that energy is just going down into the earth. And then what I'd like to ask you to do next is to take one or both hands and place them on your lower dantian. And I'm asking you to do this because I want you to experience it not as an imagined place in your mind's eye, but I want you to literally feel it so that it is a somatic experience, so that you're in your body. And as you're there, you can start to breathe into that place, into that lower area below your belly button and your pubic bone. Just breathe in there and feel what you feel on your hands. Maybe there's some warmth. Maybe there's a little bit of tension. And just keep breathing into that spot. So you want to discover it and get to know it as your home. It is the place that you can go to whenever anything is swirling you out or confusing you or difficult. This is the one place that you can return to that's always there, where you can regroup and center. And as you keep breathing into that spot, that place, holding your hands there, if you're comfortable, I might ask you to send some kind of a positive affirmation to yourself, such as, may I be happy and fulfilled. Or you could wish yourself, may I be calm and at peace. Or you could say, may I have kindness and gentle compassion for myself. Just let those words breathe into your lower dantian, this place of embodied centering. That's great. And then very slowly and surely, your own time, no rush, start to come back into the room around you. You might slowly open your eyes, hear the sounds, notice the sound of my voice, any other sounds that are around you. Great, and then just come back into the room. Okay, good. All right. Well, I'm assuming that most of us are back. I'm not looking at all of your faces, so I can't see, but I'm going to go on. We're going to come back. We're going to do one more exercise where we're going to take that which we just did with our embodied centering, and we're going to layer another idea, motion, movement of chi on top of it. Right, because we're trying to activate an alchemical transformation, and the way that these cascades work is that you build one thing and then you add on top of it, and you hold both at the same time. And so that's where we're going to go to our next line of Lingshu Chapter 8. So we have this idea that virtue flows down and the breaths expand. Okay, so now we've gone from the vertical axis, we're now onto the horizontal axis. I'm mispronouncing that word terribly wrong. And so what we want to look at and try to understand is, what does it look like to drop down and extend out both at the same time? And the reason why this is important for us is because we sit with patients. And we sit with them on Zoom calls. We sit with them in the treatment room when we're back in person, live with them. And so we want to be able to make that connection without losing that connection with ourselves. Okay, so that's the trick. And so this is what this one looks like. And again, I'm back in the realm of martial arts. Forgive me, but these two Shaolin masters, I think, are just such a beautiful model of this dropping down and extending out. So you can see, when you look at this image of them, you can see how the chi is dropped down. They definitely have warm feet. But at the same time, as they're preparing, they've got themselves in the stance of activity, of doing something, they're looking at their eyes, but you can see that they continue, their chi is still dropped down, and they are extending out with their entire being. It's not just from their head. So I think, so this is what we're trying to do when we're sitting with our patients. We're trying to drop down and extend out without losing that vertical. Now, this upper right photo, I think, is another example. This is Stephen Gilligan, my teacher out in California. And I just went to his website. I was looking for an image of him. And when I saw this one, I was actually kind of surprised, because here he is. He's, finished a seminar of some sort. That is Robert Dilts standing to his left. They finished a seminar, and these are all their students behind them. But you can see, even as he's posing for the camera and smiling out to the camera, we still have this sense that his chi is dropped down and he's extending out from his lower dantian. And then, of course, animals do this just by nature, right? And, we hear notions, words of, one's animal body. And, it is this. So this wolf, when we look at it, you can see how its energy is held in its belly, but yet it's looking at its eyes. So it's ready to do whatever it needs to do. It could flee, it could attack, it could do whatever. It's primed, but also relaxed and very present. So some of the benefits, the value of working with ourselves in this way, and then working with our patients this way, is that in this time of the coronavirus, I mean, in all times, but in particular in this time of the coronavirus, like when our patients come to us, we don't know what state they're going to be in. There's going to be lots of different conditions that are going to come. People who've lost loved ones. I mean, I was speaking with one patient, and he has anxiety attacks whenever he even leaves the house, right? So by doing this, where we're dropped down as we extend out and connect with that person that we're working with, we help to ground the situation. And then also for us personally, instead of us being locked up in our heads and our eyes, when we've got our energy pulled down, it gives us access to our three centers of intelligence, right? So we can connect with our head, our heart, and our gut. Almost like we can go up and down this elevator, and we've got some flexibility in terms of where we go. In terms of connection, this way of working allows us to join with someone without merging with them, because we're staying in our own body, which it's a wonderfully welcoming and supportive way to join and connect with someone. So then, because then you can really offer things, you can feel into your own body. It's like your body provides you with another level of a diagnostic, because you can see what you're feeling in your own body as you're talking with the person. And you can even say, wow, I'm feeling all this tightness in my chest right now. What are you experiencing? And you can bounce it off of them to see what's going on, to get a deeper level of what is going on. And then lastly, we've got this area of activate, which, working this way enables you to listen much more deeply, so that you're just not up in your head caught in the story that they're telling you, but you have access to your entire body for some very deep listening. And it's this idea, too, that if you can drop your chi down into your lower dantian, then they are probably going to follow. I mean, some people are very resistant and they will not follow. But for the most part, my experience, people will drop down with you. All right, so now we're ready for let's give this one a shot. And so this is hard, right? Because this exercise would be so much better if we were in person, where we could like sit across from somebody or, and kind of partner up and practice this. And so we don't have the luxury of doing that. So what I'd like you to do to try to have a sense of this movement of chi that's a very subtle one is that we're going to go into that embodied centering place again, with our eyes closed or with our gaze dropped and definitely not looking at anything. And once we get in there and we're really back connected in with that place, I want to ask you to slowly open your eyes and look at some object in the room or the environment where you are. And as you do that, it's really important that you continue to keep your awareness in your lower dantian. And then as a practice, as you're holding that awareness, maybe in your mind's, language, your internal dialogue, maybe describe the object that you're looking at to yourself. Say like, oh, that chair is blue and looks really comfortable, or, whatever. And as you do that, as you turn your brain on and start like doing that internal talking, the trick is to continue holding your lower dantian. Okay, so let's give this a shot. Again, let's try. It's a subtle thing, but let's see what we can do here. So again, I'd like you to ask you to get comfortable, and you can lower your gaze, close your eyes. Just don't look at anything directly. And again, return to your breath. Just as kind of your way in, just start noticing the breath. Good. And then as you do that, let's start to bring the chi down. And remember, you can do that by putting your awareness into your sits bones or any place where you're connecting with the floor or the chair that you're sitting on. And if your feet are flat on the floor, you can put notice how they're touching the floor, what that sensation feels like. And then let's go ahead and let's put our hands on our lower dantian so we get that. So we really hone in on that place of centering, right? That embodied centering place. And again, feel it physically. You want the physical somatic sensation of your lower dantian. And let's just breathe into that. Right, good. And then on your time, when you feel it's right for you, I want you to ask you to slowly start to open your eyes. And as you do that, do it slowly, because you want to make sure that you keep your awareness connected with your belly. Slowly open your eyes, keeping that connection. And, Don't look at the computer screen, but look at something else in the room or the outdoor space where you are. And as you continue to do that, and maybe to tell yourself something about what it is that you're seeing, I want you to make sure that you at the same time continue to keep your awareness in your lower dantian. And if you find that you slip away from your lower dantian, then just bring your hands back there again and bring your awareness there. And then once again, notice the object and see if you can say something to yourself about it. Good. And after you've done that for a few turns, let's come back in. We're going to come back in and just go back to embodied centering. You can drop your gaze again. Go back in, reconnect to your lower dantian. And stay there for a moment. Just breathe. Great. Okay, and then when you're ready, start to slowly come back into the room. You slowly open your eyes. Sort of take in your surroundings. Maybe move your body a little bit, your feet, your hands. Just come back in. So I'm hoping that you got some kind of an experience of that. It's something that that you can continue practicing. I mean, when I am walking in the city every day, I make an effort to remember to go into my lower dantian as I look out at the world around me and take that in. Or if you are sheltering in place with another person or are Zooming with someone, you can try it. Try when you're talking with someone to stay connected in that place in yourself as you communicate and see what that's like. And you can even toggle back and forth. You can do it where you just do what you probably normally do, what we all kind of normally do. And then you can go back in and then you can try the other. And, the other person, they don't need to be aware of what you're up to, but you can kind of see if there's any felt sense difference for you. All right, and so we're on our last line. We're almost done with the conversation that we're having here, this lecture that I'm giving. And so, here we are. We're on the last line of the Lingshu Chapter 8 that we're looking at. So we had virtue flows down, breaths expand, and there's life. And so here we're talking about, again, organization of chi. We're talking about the field. So the chi that is all around us in this idea that we're living in a sea of chi. And I found this wonderful article by this man, Michael Stanley Baker, who is he is a Taoist, he is a Chinese medicine practitioner, and he's also an archaeologist. And he wrote this white paper, and it's all about qi. He spends the whole time just talking about qi, which I found to be fascinating. And I loved this quote, and I'm going to read it because I think it really describes this organization of qi that is the field state that we're just discussing. So qi as a substance is shared between people and also becomes part of them, becomes internalized to them. It coheres people. It's not simply something we take in from outside, but something we participate in. There's a shared space between people wherein one finds expression and being. So it's this idea that, when we breathe in qi, we are in process with it all the time. We are giving to it, it is giving back to us. And so again, when we take this into the context of when we sit with a patient, this idea that whether we like it or not, whether we plan it or not, whether we're aware of it or not, there is a field of qi that forms between us. It just happens. And so if we practice from that standpoint, then we also understand that we are like in this space, we're not doing to somebody, we are being with someone. And that's a very big difference in terms of thinking about how you're working with someone. And it's also this idea that in giving treatment and working to heal someone, that they are in turn also offering us treatment and giving us healing. So it's all a two-way street because we're in this field together. And I just wanted to close with this beautiful quote from Laurie Deschard. It's in her book that she wrote with Benjamin, her husband, called The Alchemy of Inner Work. And it's going to be published, I understand, fairly soon. It's not yet available, but I think you can probably pre-order it online. And I think she sums up this whole idea so beautifully. She says, I know what my patient needs because although we are distinct individuals, my patient and I are also deeply connected through a substratum of knowing that pervades the field of our relationship. My patient's healing is connected to my own. I think it's just so beautifully said, Laurie. It's wonderful. So just final, we've talked about a bunch of things. And so I just wanted to summarize real quick. So first thought is that it's about you, this idea that heaven within me is virtue. And so when we say that, we're not talking about an advanced ego state or, a sense of inflation about oneself. But what we are talking about is that each one of us is given our virtue and our personal Tao that is ours to bring out in the way that we do into the world. Which is a really, really beautiful thing. And that in doing that the first step, caring for yourself, is the first act in caring for others. So I think as healers, this is a real important thing for us to remember, that we have to take care of ourselves first. And by doing that, we'll be able to take care of others. And this idea that chi follows awareness. So that is a place where you have control. You have control over where you place your awareness. You can obsess and watch the news cycle all day long and freak out, or you can, drop your chi and your awareness into your lower dantian and be centered. And then that embodied centering is home. It's a place, no matter what's going on with your patients, with the fragmentation of life around us, we can always go home. Holding center while extending out can be learned through practice, which we talked about. It's contagious. You lead, your patients will follow. And this idea that you are a needle. So at Ling Shu, spiritual pivot, numinous pivot, this idea that the needle and the person that is administering the needle are both part of the process. You are a needle. And just that we're all in this together. So we're influencing the newly forming field of chi. I think that's hopefully arising post-COVID, and that we can contribute and help influence it. So that's it for today, guys.
Jessie, thank you very much. And that was beautiful. And if you guys like this stuff, I just want to let you know kind of what's around, and then we're going to take some questions if there are any, and open up our mics and do our community connection. But Jessie does have stuff on healthy, and I just kind of wanted to show you guys because it's kind of not a coincidence, but I was looking at our upcoming live webinars, and you mentioned Laurie Deschard. Laurie had to leave for a patient. She was online, and her book, her new book that's coming out, I got a chance to look at the draft copy, and it's fantastic. And if you order it on Amazon, pre-order it, it helps make it a bestseller if there's so many pre-orders. Yes, it'd be nice to have a book out there on changing the field, the chi inside yourself to change the environment around you that has a foundation in Chinese medicine and Taoism. So check out her book. But check this out, guys. So here's what we have coming up for live webinars. So this month in May, Laurie Deschard is doing a live webinar. So it's like this material. And then we got Gil, but and I adore Gil, but it's not in the theme of what we're talking about. Then we got Yvonne Farrell talking about the extraordinary impact on psychoneuroimmunology. Then Keith is going to talk about burnout and protocols. And then Yvonne's back again on the 5 spirits for a renewed sense of purpose and inner harmony. I just think it's kind of interesting how we have that. And so speakers like Yvonne Farrell, Laurie Deschard, Jessie Shaw, Randine Lewis, Keith Bell. If you like this kind of material, we have lots online at Healthy and more to come. And to remind you to check out the resource page to see what we've added. And I'm going to do 4 days of this kind of work from the neuroscience aspect of it. And so I'd love to have you guys join me Monday to Thursday of next week. And we're going to do 2 hours a day to really immerse ourselves in it. I'm always amazed, Jessie, we'll unmute this, and I'm curious if other people want to chime in. The more I dive into this consciousness work, the more it's the simple things that have the profound effect, like just stopping and breathing and bringing our awareness to our lower dantian, just stuff like that I find amazing. It doesn't have to be complicated. There's no reason why we can't do it because it's just so simple. And then, the gaze, there's even research now when we start to do that gaze that we did, we now know that open focus. So when you bring your awareness to your lower dantian, or you open your eyes and you have a open focus, so you're not nearly focused, that the brain goes into alpha. And that's when we start to tap into parts of our brain for creativity. And alpha theta, they believe, to the superconscious, we call universal chi, you have to be in that state. And so they have started measuring with EEG what happens to the brain when we do these things. So they're so simple that we dismiss them, right? However, how easy is it to just sit there and breathe and bring your awareness and to have that effect? In the theme of this, if the team can put it in there, I have a website called laurenbrown.com, and I have a series of conscious talks on there. So I have one with Bruce Lipton, Lynn McTaggart, many other people that you find of interest. And some of the Conscious Tuesdays, like this one, I'll put into that website, because the website houses an interview series I've done and then continue to do called Conscious Talks. And so it's more on this theme. And so they're all under about an hour, majority of them. So if you want to check this, if this fills you up, you want to learn more about this, go to laurenbrown.com. I see it in the chat room there. And you can watch the Conscious Talk series. And the introduction to the workshop I'm doing, that's in there as well. So if you want to watch that, you can do that there as well. Hope to see you guys. I'm checking that out because we're all doing our part and we're working on our inside, healing ourselves. And then I love how you talked about that, the chi, how it's inside but outside, and we equate this relationship. And my teacher of consciousness has shared that you can't heal the mind of other people. You can only heal your own mind, and your perception changes when you heal your mind. So you see them differently, but also the vibration changes. So that's how you impact the world, not by trying to make other people change, not by trying to change other things in the material world. It's all an inside job. And when you start to really heal and your vibration changes, and enough of us do it, we're all like Wi-Fi systems. So we start to change our world because our vibration changes. And that's what I'm hoping the Conscious Talk series does, and why I was so excited, Jessie, to have you on here today. And why I'm going to do my workshop is, when I don't know if you find this, but when I teach, like even in the workshop I set up, it's still so selfish for me, because by teaching and running and preparing the talk, I have to go so deep into the material again and practice it. And so I benefit from preparing the material and teaching it. And it fills my heart up. So why not do it?
Yeah, it's great work. It's great work. Yeah.
So Jessie, thank you. We're going to have you coming back because I love it. Can you talk a little bit about your movie and the course you have on Healthy? Because you said it in your lecture today, but I think it slipped by. Like there have been, there is material, there is evidence of old texts that have been discovered that you just briefly talked about. So older than the textbooks that we've studied our classical Chinese medicine from, that are
right. Well, I mean, so the course that I have on Healthy Seminars is really looking at, in a very in-depth way, at the Ma Wangdui medical texts, which I alluded to in this conversation that we just had. So, which are very, very old manuscripts that weren't discovered until 1970, which predate the Wangdi Neijing. And what's really wonderful about them is that they include both herbal formulas, as well as already at that point in time, they're starting to map out the meridians. And so there's that goes on. It's kind of it's got a lot of magic of incantations and things in it, which are very, very interesting to see. they just hadn't made that separation yet. And the other thing that is really I found real important about it and interesting is that I think as healers, we're always kind of thinking about the fact that we're supposed to fix problems. We're supposed to, fix illness. And what they were doing at that point in time, the physician's role was both to cure illness, but also to nourish life. And so they've got all of these formulas and ideas about how one goes about nourishing life, including Qigong exercises, special foods to eat, breathing techniques, sexual practices. I mean, it's all there. It's kind of amazing. So anyway, so that's what that course on Healthy Seminars is about. Covers all of that.
And just the going over these old texts like that to me fills my heart as well. Just it's that confidence knowing, hey, this has been written about a long time ago, and there's some documentation there that they're discovering today. So thanks for sharing that with us, because I wasn't aware of those texts that you've come across. So that's nice.
Yeah.
And we'll finish off with connecting with each other. So create your community, send your love to Jessie.